Hey, my name is Ronald Long, and I totally forgot to shoot an introduction for this video that I'm editing right behind me. We're continuing to talk about our volunteers in youth ministry, and we're going to talk about how we get volunteers. I know it's difficult to recruit sometimes, and so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So join me as we look at how you can recruit and get volunteers for your youth ministry. Okay, so if we're going to recruit some volunteers, if the idea is we need to get volunteers and we need people to help us in the student ministry, what do we normally need to do? Normally you might think, okay, who's somebody like me? Passionate about youth ministry, called to ministry, really wants to see the next generation, love Jesus more and do more for Jesus. Absolutely, those are good things. But I also want you to think and even picture your volunteer team right now. If you have some volunteers, you need more volunteers, picture them right now in your head. Do those volunteers look more like you or more not like you? I'll say this. When I started out in youth ministry, I was very hesitant to recruit parents of current students. I thought, nobody wants to have their mom or dad be in the youth ministry when they're in the youth ministry. Students need to get away from mom and dad so that I can minister to them better. And honestly, I was wrong. That was not a helpful thing at all, because at that moment I was young, married, had no kids. I needed people who were not like me to do ministry, mostly just because in my small church that I was at, there weren't enough young married couples with no kids who could pull off youth ministry. And even more so, looking back at that last thing we talked about, your vibe, attracting your tribe, you need different people to attract and keep different students. So here's what I want you to think about. Get volunteers. What are groups of people you can get to help you with student ministry? This is going to be hopefully a helpful grid for you to think about who you can ask and even just begin the process of asking people to be a part of the youth ministry. And the very first one I want you to think about are parents. And if that hurts you, here's what I did to make sure that parents could volunteer without being too weird in student ministry. The first thing that I told parents when I was recruiting them was, hey, you are not going to be your kid's small group leader. Your student does need somebody else, another cool adult in their life who they can talk to, they can share with, and they can have speak into their lives, because it's going to benefit you, the parent, to have someone else saying pretty much the same stuff to your kid. It's actually going to benefit you in your parenting if other adults are speaking into your kids' lives. And then secondarily, when you're in youth group, I need you to be more youth group volunteer than parent, all right? And if you can, don't take off the parent hat, I need that, but put volunteer hat on over it and have that conversation with your student. I only ever had one student tell me my parent should not be in youth ministry. Because after I would interview a parent and say, hey, here's the deal, here's these two things, you're not going to be your kid's small group leader and I need you to be more volunteer than you are parent. If they didn't self-select out at that point and if they couldn't agree to those two things, I would tell them the third thing. I'm going to ask your kid if you should be in the ministry, if you should help out in student ministry. Years and years and years of student ministry, I only had one kid tell me their one parent should not be in the student ministry. They gave a valid reason, and I told that parent I had prayed about it, and I thought that them serving in youth ministry was not the best idea. So for you, getting parents involved in youth ministry, make a list of your current parents. If you don't already have that, you should absolutely know who your kids' parents are. Just make out that list and write them all down, brainstorm it real quick, and then just put a little check mark next to parents who you think, okay, I've seen them interact with students. They don't roll their eyes and leave every time a student comes in. They actually engage and interact. Maybe they would make a good volunteer. Get these people on your list. Parents who are currently at your church and whose students are already attending youth group. They're invested. They want the youth ministry to go well because their kids go there. These people, this group right here, wants your youth ministry to thrive. And then another group that I want you to think about that you might not really rely on a ton at first are grandparents / retirees. Why in the world would I say you should search out grandparents and retirees in your church to volunteer in your youth ministry? I have got to tell you, some of my best volunteers have been people in this legacy season of life who want to make an impact somewhere, anywhere, and have decided that youth ministry is going to be the place where they do that. Grandparents and retirees are amazing people to search out because A, they've got a lot of time. If they are retired and done working, they have the opportunity to invest time into different ministries, and they won't unless you ask them. And then grandparents, have you seen grandparents interact with their teenage grandson or granddaughter? They love them a lot. And so you want that same type of energy happening in your youth group. People who are grandparents of your kids interacting with student ministry. Think of the old granddad who just can't wait to share the wisdom of his decades and decades of faithfully following and serving the Lord with this next generation. This is a group who you absolutely should be looking at and trying to figure out how you can put them in your ministry. And we'll talk about the different jobs you can give them and stuff like that. They make fantastic small group leaders. They make fantastic everything. I really think you should look and search out grandparents and retirees to volunteer in your youth ministry. Same deal with your parents. Make a list of these people in your church who just come to mind right away and are connected to the ministry already via their kids or grandkids, and see if they might be interested in serving. And then, yes, usually the people who we really veer towards when it comes to serving in student ministry, young people or young marrieds. Now, remember, this is a crew that, depending on where they are in life, they might be very busy, think they're very busy, or not very busy at all. And it's three important different categories. They might be building their career. They might be hustling really hard. They might be working really tough. They might be dating if they're younger and not married, and so that's going to be kind of tough for them to commit and volunteer. Or if they're young marrieds, they might have young kids like toddlers, and that's going to be tough for them as well. Or they're just trying to figure out what married life looks like, and that might be difficult for them to serve in the youth ministry. However, they really can make phenomenal volunteers because they are close to age of your students, and they can say, hey, I remember when I was in high school, I remember when I was in middle school, these are the lessons that I learned recently, and those lessons track because, hey, I did have a cell phone when I was in high school, unlike maybe grandparents and parents who are operating in ministry. I did have social media in high school. I do know how difficult that is. Young people and young marrieds in your church could absolutely be a great pool of people to pull from with volunteers, but the reason I put them here is because I don't want you to neglect parents and grandparents and retirees before you start thinking of people who are young, married, or single and are just now thinking, okay, how am I going to serve my church? Because you need people in your ministry who are different than you. Okay, and then the last thing that I want you to think about, the last group of people who you could potentially pull for volunteers is former students. Now, this depends a lot on your context and what you want to get out of ministry. I know there are a lot of people who are uncomfortable with that senior who graduates high school and immediately wants to volunteer in youth ministry. For us, we had a rule that you could not volunteer your first year out of youth group. You know, when you are 18 or 19 and were a part of the ministry, you had to wait at least 1 year before you could serve. Why was that? We didn't want them just hanging out with their friends. We wanted them to begin to develop their identity outside of youth group. And we just wanted to make sure that it wasn't I'm kind of failure to launch. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. So this is comfortable with me. And so I'm just going to stick around with what I know. You might disagree with me there, and that's totally fine if you do. But for us in our context, we did not let a graduated senior that very next fall serve in youth ministry. Some people might, and here's some ways I think that you might be able to do that. Is number one, give them stipulations. If they are going to be serving right out of ministry, you would want them to serve with the youngest crew you have, the 6th graders and the 7th graders. And you would want to make sure to say, hey, you're going to volunteer, but you're not going to be like your junior, now senior buddies, small group leader. You are going to be helping out with the 6th and 7th grade leaders. Also, I would pair them up with either a parent or a grandparent or really a parent or a grandparent. I'll stick with that, because you would want this energy of a former student to be tempered a little bit by someone who's more mature, who's able to control the group, who might even be like the main person in charge when this person is volunteering. Or even if they're not a small group leader, it's still wise to pair up this person, this former student, with one of these two and say, hey, you guys serve as a team together, and that's important. And then just 3, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit. You just want to have a whole lot of conversations with these former students and make sure they know, hey, you're not just coming over here to have a good time. You're coming here to serve. You're coming here to grow. You're coming here to be a part of the team that puts on youth ministry, not participate in youth ministry. Again, we put up that barrier of 1 year just to let students kind of find themselves after high school and then serve in youth ministry, but this was a thing that we did that we found very helpful. Okay, so, and one last statement on this right here. If your church does not have a solid college and singles ministry, and you've got kids who graduate high school but don't leave for college, you as youth pastor might consider how you can help them continue to serve in church, in youth ministry, and what that might look like. Because we want college kids to be involved in church still, but most churches, especially smaller, more rural, older churches, aren't very good at integrating that in-between time. Usually churches only get good once a former student gets married. Then they begin integrating into the church. And so we want to help bridge this gap between former students and married people, and a youth minister can do that. You just have to be really intentional with it. Okay, caveat done. This is how we get volunteers. We make a list of parents, grandparents, young people and marrieds, former students. And then you have in front of you that list of people who you could potentially ask to be a youth ministry volunteer. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you're liking this content, make sure you do the like and subscribe and the other YouTube things. I really appreciate it. Sign up for the mail list that is down below so that I can email you and let you know every time I release a new video, so that it comes straight to you and you get it in your email box. That would be really great for me. I'd greatly appreciate it. In the next video, we're going to talk about how you train your volunteers. Join me next time. We'll see you then.